Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamuna Tira Banachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana. Jamuna Tira Banachari. Jamuna Tira Banachari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So here we go through it one word at a time first, and then we chant the padas together. I'm just double checking because I've been to 2 other temples in the last couple of weeks, so don't want to do anything wrong. Don't want to get thrown out on my ear. Evam nirjita shadvargahi kriyate bhakti ishvare vasudeve bhagavati yaya sanglabhyate rati evam nirjita shadvargai kriyate bhakti ishvare Vasudeve Bhagavati Yaya Sanglabhyate Rati Evam Nirjita Shadvargai Kriyate Bhaktirishvare Vasudeve Bhagavati Yaya Sanglabhyate Rati Evam nirjita shadvargai kriyate bhaktirishvare vasudeve bhagavati yaya sanglabhyate rati. Others, please.
Vasudeve Bhagavati Yaya samlabhyate rati. Evam nirjita sadvargai. Kriyate bhakti ishvare. Vasudeve bhagavati. Yaya samlabhyate rati. Evam nirjita sadvargai. Kriyate bhakti ishvare. Vasudeve bhagavati. Yaya samlabhyate ratihi. Evam nirjita sadvargai. Kriyate bhakti ishvare. Vasudeve bhagavati. Yaya samlabhyate rati.
Any online attendees?
Yes, Maharaj. May I recite the verse?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. You're most kind. Evam nirjita sadvargai.
Evam nirjita sadvargai.
Kriyate bhaktir ishvare.
Kriyate bhakti ishvare.
Vasudeve bhagavati.
Vasudeve bhagavati.
Yaya sam labhyate ratihi.
Yaya samlabhyate rati.
Evam nirjita sadvargai.
Evam nirjita sadvargai.
Kriyate bhakti ishvare.
Kriyate bhakti ishvare.
Vasudeve bhagavati.
Vasudeve bhagavati.
Yaya samlabhyate ratihi.
Yaya samlabhyate rati.
Anyone else? Okay, word to word. Evam, thus. Nirjita, subdued. Shatvargai, by the 6 symptoms of the senses. Lusty desires, anger, greed. Illusion, madness, and jealousy. Kriyate is rendered. Bhakti, devotional service. Ishvare, unto the Supreme Controller. Vasudeve, to Lord Vasudeva. Bhagavati, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yaya, by which sanglabhyate is obtained. Rati, attachment. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. By these activities, as mentioned above, one is able to cut down the influence of the enemies, namely lust, anger, greed, illusion, madness, and jealousy. And when thus situated, one can render service to the Lord. In this way, one surely attains the platform of loving service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Responsively, please. By these activities, as mentioned above, one is able to cut down the influence of the enemies, namely lust, anger, greed, illusion, madness, and jealousy. And when thus situated, one can render service to the Lord. In this way, one surely attains the platform of loving service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I figured that last one, everyone would remember it well enough that even though it's a little long, it would catch. Srila Prabhupada's purport. As mentioned in verses 30 and 31, One's first duty is to approach the spiritual master, the representative of the personality of Godhead, to begin rendering service to him. Prahlāda Mahārāja proposed that from the very beginning of life, Kaumara acharet prajñah, a small child should be trained to serve the spiritual master while living at the gurukula. Brahmachari gurukule vasandanto gurohitam. This is the beginning of spiritual life. Guru parashaya sadhu vartmanuvartanam saddharma pracha. By following the instructions of the Guru and the śāstras, the disciple attains the stage of devotional service and becomes unattached to possessions. Whatever he possesses, he offers to the spiritual master, the Guru, who engages him in Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu. The disciple follows strictly and in this way learns how to control his senses. Then, by using his pure intelligence, he gradually becomes a lover of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as confirmed by Srila Rupa Goswami, Adau Shraddha Tata Sadhu Sangha. In this way, one's life becomes perfect, and his attachment for Krishna becomes positively manifested. In that stage, he is situated in ecstasy, experiencing bhava and anubhava, as explained in the following verse. Om ajnanatimidandhasya jnanam janashalakaya chakshurunmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Mukhaṁ karoti vachalam pangum langhayate girim jatkripatamahang bande Shri Gurun dinataranam Shri Chaitanya manobhishtam sthapitam yena bhutale swayam rupa kadamahyam dadati swapadantikam. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Pancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. I'm especially seeking the blessings of the Vaishnavas because this looks like a short purport, but it's unbearably rich. There's so many ways to go with this little purport. There's so many, as anyone who's heard a few of my classes knows, there are two things that I'm always attentive to. One is context, and the other is connections. And sometimes I get lost with the connections that I find in a purport. If there's a reference or even an allusion to a verse elsewhere in the scriptures, or even maybe something Srila Prabhupada might have said that in one of his purports that's really well known, then I'll chase that down, and then I'll chase down the connections I see in the purport and commentaries on that verse. And sometimes I just get completely lost. This is an old habit of mine. It's something that would happen to me even, when I was in the Navy back in the 60s, I would have to write things to the Defense Intelligence Agency requesting changes in different catalogs of targets, especially in Southeast Asia. And I had a college dictionary on my desk because I wanted to always make sure that I had the right word, and sometimes I would look at a word and that would make me think of another word, and then 30 minutes later this Marine gunnery sergeant who worked in our shop would look at me and say, "Willie, you gotten lost in that dictionary again?" So this is an old habit of mine. And it's a habit that was strengthened when I was in graduate school. This is how academics and professors learn to read things, is we chase down connections. And so, speaking of context, Srila Prabhupada mentions in his purport the previous verses. So I want to rewind for just a little bit and go back a couple of verses, starting with 29. Of the different processes recommended for disentanglement from material life, the one personally explained and accepted by the Supreme Personality of Godhead should be considered all perfect. That process is the performance of duties by which love for the Supreme Lord develops. This is the topic of Srimad Bhagavatam. If we go back to the first canto in the 5th chapter, at the end of the 4th chapter, we find Vyasadeva bummed out. He's depressed, despondent, because he's done so much work for the upliftment of humankind, compiling the Vedas, the Puranas, the Itihasas, and still he feels unfulfilled. Something's missing, and he's pondering, did I really miss actually glorifying devotional service to the Supreme Personality? I mean, is that what's bothering me? And then Narada Muni, as he does in pretty much every canto of the Bhagavatam, shows up. His guru shows up and sets him aright and tells him, all that you've done, all this work that you've done is, anybody remember the... It's a garbage heap. This is all compared to a garbage heap. Any literature that doesn't specifically and exclusively glorify the Supreme Personality of Godhead, His devotees, and devotional service, it's like unto a pilgrimage of crows, which is the dump. And there's another word, an adjective he uses to describe it. Anyone? Jugupsitam. It's disgusting. It's detestable. And that's because in the Vedas, there's something for everyone. And it's sometimes been compared to a jungle of sounds. Part of my hearing problems are that if there's any ambient sound in the room, I often can't hear what someone's saying to me. And so if we find ourselves without proper guidance in this jungle of sounds, it's just all kind of these different ideas. Oh, you want this, you can do that. You want that, you can do this. You know, you want money, you can follow the karma kanda. If you want to have realization of the super soul and some mystic powers to kind of go along with it, you can do yoga. You can follow the yoga marg. You want freedom. You want to be able to identify yourself as one with everything. Like the old joke. I guess it's the Buddhist approaching the hot dog stand. Not the kind of Buddhists that I would hang out with. But one with everything. Well, then you've got the Jnanakanda. So there's something for everyone. So it's really confusing. This Purana recommends, the Devi as the supreme goal. Worshiping Devi as the supreme goal of life. That Shiva, another somebody else. So we need something that exclusively glorifies bhakti. As Prabhupada says in one of his purports in the first canto, I always found this really charming. The first time I read it, I thought, that is so kind of like old school, it's cool. Bhakti unto Vasudeva. This is the only thing that's actually discussed. Other things come up, but generally they're presented by way of contrasting them with bhakti. And Prahlāda continues. One must accept the bona fide spiritual master and render service unto him with great devotion and faith. Whatever one has in one's possession should be offered to the spiritual master, and in the association of saintly persons and devotees, one should worship the Lord, hear the glories of the Lord with faith, glorify the transcendental qualities and activities of the Lord, and always meditate on the Lord's lotus feet, and worship the deity of the Lord strictly according to the injunctions of Shastra and Guru. One should always remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his localized representation as the Paramatma, who is situated in the core of every living entity's heart. Thus, one should offer respect to every living entity according to that living entity's position or manifestation. Offer respect to every living entity. We call this sometimes offering due respect. So, if we encounter, well, as I was walking over, there was a gentleman walking down the street yelling at himself. I went over to Sprouts yesterday and I encountered someone else doing the same thing. This is a common thing the last maybe 40 years or so. That gentleman deserves a certain amount of respect. He's a human being. He's a jiva. He's part and parcel of Krishna. He deserves a certain amount of respect. If I encounter Bhakti Sundar Goswami Maharaj, he also deserves respect. A different kind of respect, a different degree of respect perhaps than that gentleman, different variety of respect. This is a saintly person who's dedicated his body, mind, words, and his very self overtly, made it a big announcement. He wears a big sign, dresses himself in a big sign that says, I got no other business than becoming a devotee and sharing whatever I've gotten from my gurus with anyone who will accept it. So he deserves respect just like that gentleman, but even more, and certainly in a different way. So at least the first time we see him in the mornings, we should offer him our obeisances. I don't need to offer obeisances to that gentleman walking down the sidewalk. It would confuse him, and it would probably just send him into a tailspin that he might not recover from for a week. What is this weird guy in the orange sheets doing, throwing himself on the ground because I'm walking? He wouldn't it wouldn't be appropriate. So every living entity, according to that living entity's position and manifestation. And then today's verse, by these activities, one is able to cut down the influence of the enemies, namely lust, anger, greed, illusion, madness, and jealousy. And when thus situated, one can render service to the Lord. So, and then in this way, one surely attains rati, attachment for the Lord, bhava, spiritual ecstasy, the bud of prema. This happens naturally when we engage in these kinds of activities. So last night was Dharmaraj, wasn't it? Asked Maharaj, what is it that keeps us bound in samsara? And Maharaj was generally talking about the false ego, our sense of identity with something other than who we really are. Jiver Swarupahoy Krishner Nityadas. So we identify with some manifestations of the material energy. So, I might think I'm an old white American man, and someone else might think, they're a young African woman, and someone else might think they're a Turkish, middle-aged Turkish woman or something like that. And because if I'm from Philadelphia, I've also got a root for the Steelers. No, Pittsburgh. If I'm from Pittsburgh, I have to root for the Steelers. If I'm from Philadelphia, I have to root for the Eagles, or else I won't be able to go anywhere if I'm wearing the wrong T-shirt or jersey. So we identify with these things, and I sometimes this is so immature. This is such an immature consciousness. It's like high school. In high school, we identified with our high school, with our teams, right? So, on Fridays at my school, Mount Vernon High School in Northern Virginia, we'd get these victory tags in maroon and gray, the school colors, beat tiger, trounce, got to be alliterative, right? Trounce tigers. So that was the Groveton Tigers, because it's always the nearest high school. It's the biggest rival. And, you know, you go to a football game on Friday night, and there would probably be fights breaking out. Just like you got the football hoodlums in the UK, you know. You go to a football game to get into a fight, get good and drunk and get into a fight. So, you know, but the thing is, the kids that we got into fights with, they might be kids that we went to elementary or middle school together, because our high schools are right close to each other. And the middle school districts, I mean, it's just silly to identify. And then all of a sudden you graduate and you go on to, you know, the University of Pennsylvania or the United States Military Academy or whatever, and you identify with something else, right? Kill Navy. You know, if you're going to West Point, it's kill Navy. At one point in my life, I was headed for Annapolis, so it was like, you know, I'd watch the Army-Navy game, and if Army won, which they did at least half of the time, that was a big drag on the, I mean, that just kind of like spoiled that whole Saturday. It was just complete silliness. And so to identify with all these things that we're actually just passing through, it's just silliness. So Maharaj was kind of pointing that out. And then connected with that are these things that keep us bound. These 6 enemies: lust, anger, greed, illusion, madness, and jealousy. There's a whole series of classes we could give, at least 6 classes we could give on those, but I'm not going to do that because I have somewhere else I want to go. And then, but ultimately the point is that once we've freed from all these distractions, all these things that keep us from the dirt, right, on the mirror, Cheto Darpana Marjanam. And once we've cleansed the mirror, once we're actually able to begin to perceive what we really are as consciousness, which is the point of any yoga, yogas chitta vritti nirodha. That we want to still all these disturbances caused by these 6 internal enemies. Why? So that we can see who we really are and live in that position as consciousness, as eternal entities whose real potential is love. It's real knowledge and love. Anandamaya abhyasat. So, that's the real point here. And Srila Prabhupada promises in his purport, he says, in this way, one's life becomes perfect and our attachment becomes positively manifested. So we're attached to all these things. You know, when I was just recalling, I was talking with maybe it was last night, you know, when I was first introduced to Krishna consciousness, anyway, I've talked to a lot of people over the last few weeks. I was really attached to surfing. I wasn't particularly happy in the material world unless I was on a wave. So, you know, there are these different attachments, and these things keep us bound to this world too. Srila Prabhupada sometimes would half joke and sometimes say quite seriously, especially when he was in Hawaii, that people too attached to surfing, their next body was pretty well determined. It would be that of a fish. And I remember when I darn near killed myself body surfing 50 years ago, actually. It was in summer of '74. I dragged myself out of the water, and I remember lying on the beach thinking, man, you are not a dolphin, you are not a seal. You have no business, you know, what is your business out there? And I actually didn't go in the water for maybe a month and a half or 2 months, mainly because my neck hurt so much and I was just like really a little freaked out. That didn't last long. The attachment was still there. And I was pretty solidly situated as a devotee at that time. I'd been practicing maybe for 5 years at that point, and had a nice position in the temple. But for exercise, it's my story and I'm sticking to it. I would go body surfing at Makapu'u or Sandy Beach. And so these attachments, these attachments are very strong. But if we can get rid of these illusions, get rid of all the misidentifications, we can get rid of all these anarthas, these false values, then we can begin to see who we are and develop real attachment systematically. So there are a couple of lists that I wanted to look at. So Prahlāda Mahārāja is referring to different processes of devotional service. This is a different list from what he gives elsewhere, the Navalakshana Bhakti, beginning with service to the spiritual master. So, if we look in Srila Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, in the second chapter, which covers a few chapters in Srila Prabhupada's Nectar of Devotion, we see these 64 angas, 64 different aspects, 64 different practices of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti that help us become, first of all, free from material attachment and progressively develop attachment and then love for Krishna. So I'm not going to go through all 64, but I want to mention the first 20, and I'll just read them as they appear in the Nectar of Devotion. We have a pretty good translation of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu nowadays, and I use that a lot. But because of time, I'll just take a look at these first 20 as they appear in the Nectar of Devotion, because these are particularly important, as Srila Rupa Goswami points out, and we'll see that. So, Srila Prabhupada writes that Srila Rupa Goswami, he doesn't want to doesn't want to enter into details at this particular point, but he just wants to place out, give us the principles, the essential principles. So these are 64 main angas of bhakti. There's unlimited ways to serve Krishna. Srila Prabhupada personally told me and a couple of other devotees in devotional service cannot be stereotyped. There's nothing that cannot be engaged in Krishna's service. Simply, we require guidance from the expert spiritual master how to engage everything in Krishna's service. That's the only catch. So, 1, accepting the shelter of the lotus feet of a bona fide spiritual master. So that's Sri Guru Padashraya that Srila Prabhupada mentions in his purport. 2, becoming initiated by the spiritual master and learning how to discharge devotional service. So, Diksha Shikshadi, accepting initiation and accepting instructions in the process of devotional service from the spiritual master. 3, obeying the orders of the spiritual master with faith and devotion. Vishrampena Guru Seva. Vishrambha, it's a really interesting word. Srila Prabhupada often talks about, here he says faith and devotion. Sometimes he says awe and reverence. There are actually 2 elements that are essential in our relationship with the disciple's relationship with the spiritual master. One is gaurava, or reverence, and the other is vishrambha, intimacy. Intimacy, it begins with confidence. That's also a way of seeing vishrambha. Just like the cowherd boys, that's a word that describes Krishna's cowherd boyfriends in Vrindavan, vishrambha. They identify so closely with Krishna that they even identify with his clothes. Krishna is one of us. That's how intimate. And how much confidence they have is expressed, say, in the Aghasura Lila, where they encounter this big python with his mouth open, and they think, And they have this debate. Big snake, cave. Big snake, cave. Whatever. If it's a big snake, Krishna's got our back. And they just march right on into Aghasura's mouth. So this Vishrambha begins with confidence, the kind of confidence that whatever the Guru tells me, I'm going to try that. I'm going to do that. I'm going to follow his instruction. And then it develops into an intimacy where ultimately we can anticipate the Guru's needs. Srila Prabhupada would sometimes talk about the different classes of servants. First class servant doesn't have to be told what the master needs. First class servant just anticipates the master's needs and is Johnny on the spot or Jenny on the spot. The second class servant does what they're asked by the master. And the third class servant, maybe not. They might have to be told a few times and they still can't get it right. Vishrampena Gurur Seva. And then Sadhu Vartmana, so following in the footsteps of the great Acharyas, Srila Prabhupada mentions in today's purport, inquiring from the spiritual master how to advance in Krishna consciousness. Saddharma Pracha. 6, being prepared to give up anything material for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. This means that when we're engaged in the devotional service of Sri Krishna, we must be prepared to give up something that we may not like to give up. And also we have to accept something that we may not like to accept. 7, residing in a sacred place of pilgrimage like Dwarka or Vrindavan. This is very important. This, as we see at the end of the list, this is one of the 5 most important, most powerful practices. 8, accepting only what's necessary, or dealing with the material world only as far as necessary. 9, observing the fasting day on Ekadashi. 10, worshiping sacred trees like the banyan tree. We have easy access to that at New Navadvip. Come visit us. Take darshan of our banyan tree. We're only a little proud of that. When the truth is, this is the way I've heard it anyway, and I need to double check, triple check this with Toshan Krishna Prabhu, who was intimately involved. When we were looking in 1974 for a new place for a temple, they were sending devotees who were engaged in this, were sending pictures to Srila Prabhupada of the different places they were looking at. When he saw the picture of that banyan tree, he immediately said, "Get that place." So Ambarish did.
How big is that banyan tree?
Very big. No, it's much bigger than that. Maybe not. I don't know. I'd have to, you'd have to do one of those things that you learned in trigonometry or something, I don't know. It's very tall. We have 40-foot mango trees, and that banyan tree is taller than those much taller than those mango trees, and expansive. And we look at pictures from 1974, 75, when Srila Prabhupada was there, and look at the banyan tree now, and it's grown so much. And a big part of that tree is missing. A little over 4 years ago, one godbrother who's a certified arborist came just before the pandemic, came to Honolulu. He started out at the Honolulu temple. A devotee lives in Alatra named Pranarshi. He's a certified arborist. So he must be 69 now. He was 65 years old and a stroke survivor. And he was up there in that banyan tree, probably 25 feet up, with an 18-inch chainsaw, or maybe a 21, a big chainsaw, because they're huge branches that he had to cut. And he had to bring down a huge part of that tree because the main trunk supporting it was hollowed out by termite damage and wouldn't support it in a storm. And we had a big hurricane, Category 4, Category 5 hurricane pass a couple 100 miles south of the islands last August. And we had 5 days, I think, of sustained winds of 50 to 60 miles an hour with gusts of up to 80. That's when the fires in Lahaina happened and wiped out most of that city. So that huge branch, or actually a complex of branches supported by that trunk, could have come down on our restaurant during that period. Our restaurant / prasadam room / temporary Krishna lounge. So these are referred to as vidhi, or regulations, and they're the do's. The next are the nishedha. They would be the yama in the yoga marg, right? The don'ts, the prohibitions. And these are observed by avoiding them. One should rigidly give up the company of non-devotees. One should not instruct a person who's not desirous of accepting devotional service. One should not be very enthusiastic about constructing costly temples or monasteries. One should not try to read too many books, nor should one develop the idea of earning his livelihood by lecturing on or professionally reciting Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita. One should not be neglectful in ordinary dealings. Pay your bills. One should not be under the spell of lamentation in loss or jubilation in gain. One should not disrespect the demigods. One should not give unnecessary trouble to any living entity. One should carefully avoid the various offenses in chanting the holy name of the Lord or in worshiping the deity in the temple. And this becomes expanded greatly in subsequent chapters where each of these is discussed a little bit with pramana, because Jiva Goswami gives us, 2, 3 lists of offenses to be avoided in worshiping the deity, the list of offenses to avoid in chanting the holy names, etc. And 10, one should be very intolerant toward the blasphemy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, or his devotees. And then Srila Rupa Goswami says, Prabhupada says, without following the above-mentioned 10 principles, one can't properly elevate himself to the platform of sadhana bhakti. He says, Rupa Goswami mentions 20 items. All of them are very important. Srila Rupa Goswami says these 20 items constitute the entrance to the temple of bhakti. So we don't really get full access to the other angas of sadhana bhakti without doing this. And then he says, among these 20, 3 are particularly important. And that is Sri Guru Padashraya, taking shelter of the lotus feet of a bona fide spiritual master. Diksha Shikshadi, accepting initiation and instructions from the spiritual master. And Vishrambhena Guru Seva, rendering confident service with, how does Srila Prabhupada put it here? With faith and devotion to the spiritual master. So Sri Prahlāda Mahārāja mentions that in today's verse. And if we engage in these things, then they not only free us from these 6 enemies, but they give us access to the full range of progress in devotional service, from Shraddha to Prema. So we've got Shraddha, this initial faith in Bhakti, and in one of his commentaries on one of the verses in the 2nd chapter that our acharyas tell us describe these 9 different stages of Bhakti that Srila Rupa Goswami suggests in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur actually suggests 14 stages. We might see 14 stages of Bhakti, with 2 stages that kind of seem to constitute Agyata Sukriti and then Bhakti Sukriti before Shraddha. So there's a background even to that initial faith, which is the mercy of the devotees, as Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur describes it. So Shraddha, Sadhu Sangha, deliberately accepting the association of devotees, and Bhajana Kriya, which includes taking shelter of the Guru, taking initiation, accepting instructions, and serving him. In other words, systematically engaging in the 64 different angas of bhakti. Bhajana Kriya, Anartha Nivritti, beginning to clear false values from our hearts, and then Nishta, and then so there are different kind of sub-stages along the way, which Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur mercifully describes in his little book Madhurya Kadambani, which I think is a must-read. Then Nishta, then we become solid steady in our practice. It doesn't mean there won't be bumps and twists, but that path, that bhakti path, which at first is very steep and bumpy, really bumpy, and tortuous, maybe even torturous, but gradually becomes broader and smoother and more level. So nishta, and then from nishta comes ruchi, which is a taste for serving the Lord. And then that develops into asakti, which is attachment specifically for the Lord himself. The other things are all there. They're all kind of folded into. These things are growing out of each other. It's like a plant growing. The root's still there. And then from asakti, then that matures into bhava, which is the budding stage of prema. And then there's prema. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur describes different stages of prema as well. So this happens naturally by the force of the bhakti that we engage in. First of all, the anarthas become cleared. The false values become free of the false values and all the attachments and the control of those 6 internal enemies that comes with that. And then eventually, we get that goal of love of God. And I just wanted to, before the hook comes, because Srila Prabhupada refers to this, he says, in that stage, we become situated in ecstasy, experiencing bhava and anubhava, as explained in the following verse. So I just wanted to give a quick preview to the next 2 verses, because this is something to look forward to. One is situated, he says, Prahlāda says, one who is situated in devotional service is certainly the controller of his senses, and thus he's a liberated person. When such a liberated person, the pure devotee, hears of the transcendental qualities and activities of the Lord's incarnations for the performance of various pastimes, his hair stands on end in his body, tears fall from his eyes, and in his spiritual realization, his voice falters. Sometimes he very openly dances, sometimes he sings loudly, and sometimes he cries. Thus he expresses his transcendental jubilation. And in the next verse, he says, when a devotee becomes like a person haunted by a ghost, and don't get me started on this one, because we find the same thing back in that 5th chapter of the 1st canto. He laughs and very loudly chants about the qualities of the Lord. Sometimes he sits to perform meditation, and he offers respects to every living entity, considering him to be a devotee of the Lord. This is the Uttama Vaishnava stage. They don't have proper discrimination because they see everybody as serving Krishna better than they do. Constantly breathing very heavily, he becomes careless of social etiquette and loudly chants like a madman. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Oh my Lord, oh Master of the universe. So I'll stop here before I get into too much trouble. Any comments or questions?
Yes,
Maharaj.
I have a question. Why the banyan tree is considered worshipable, and other trees like the fig tree, amalaki trees? Why is the reason?
That's an excellent question, and I don't have a great answer, except that they must have some connection with different pastimes of the Lord. I mean, we know that certain varieties of banyan tree, like we have, ours is Ficus bengalensis. That's the kind of banyan tree that Lord Shiva lives under, and Lord Shiva lives under our banyan tree. And there's a little shrine to Lord Shiva there. When Srila Prabhupada was asked about some of these, back in 1970, when Srila Prabhupada was asked about some of these instructions in the Nectar of Devotion, like, for example, among the offenses in deity worship is to wear red or blue clothing when worshiping the deity, or in front of the Lord is the way it's put, I think, in Nectar of Devotion. And so somebody asked Srila Prabhupada, why red or blue? Why can't we wear red or blue in front of the deity? And Prabhupada said, because it says so in the śāstras. So it was like your first answer last night about why is Krishna blue? Prabhupada was asked about that, and what was his response? Better that you go and ask him, right? I mean, there are other answers as well, but Prabhupada's, response sometimes to some of these really esoteric questions that there seem not to be answers to that our mind can grasp. He would, like he would say, well, why don't you should go there and find out. Specifically questions about Vaikuntha or Goloka and Prabhupada. Well, you should go there and find out for yourself. So I don't have a good answer. Do you have any inkling?
No, I don't. That's why I'm asking.
Well, I'm looking up in the dictionary.
By the way, Prabhupada
In
called
the Bhaktionary.
Prabhupada-
Bhakti-tionary.
Prabhupada called the surfers sufferers.
Yes, on a couple of occasions. Once on a walk, he would take walks at a little place at Ala Moana Park called Magic Island, and within easy vision there are 6, 8, 10 really good surf spots. And so they'd go out early in the morning, and there'd be what we call the dawn patrol, the people who'd get out there just before the crack of dawn, as soon as there was any light at all, and they'd paddle out to a particular break. And so Prabhupada would see them, and sometimes he would say, oh, what are they doing? And they would explain it to him, and he would say, so much trouble for taking a bath. He would joke about it. And there was one time when he talked about sea sufferers in a class. This was in May of 1976. My former wife and I had flown from the Big Island and spent a couple of weeks in Honolulu because Srila Prabhupada was there, and we were going to class. And I was sitting right next to my friend Hari Vallabha, who was even more of a surfer than I am. He was a much better surfer than I am. He was an Olympic quality swimmer who went the surfing path rather than the 7 gold medals at once path, like his buddy Mark Spitz. And we were sitting together right in front of Srila Prabhupada, and he made that remark about I call them sea sufferers. But there was that little wry smile on his face and a little twinkle in his eye. And everyone was laughing, of course, and Hari Vallabha and I were laughing as well, but we were also both beet red. Because he was poking, he was poking fun at the people who were really addicted to surfing. Because he also told us that it's almost like a regulative principle in Hawaii. You have to go swim in the ocean every day. This is a failing I have. Someplace I fall short, and I need to rectify this. Every day. Of course, he saw it as the Jamuna. And by his bathing, it became as good as the Jamuna. Draveda, did you?
Well, I thought of the Bandi Ravana, which is the forest of Bandira trees,
Bandiravana, yeah.
And the Bandira tree, the word Bandira in Sanskrit means banyan tree, Ficus indica, and it also means the tropical green amaranth or flea tree, and it means a couple other trees, but it's the banyan tree, the Bandira tree, is sacred because Krishna loves to play in there.
Yeah, Bandiravana is this like an amazing playground that you read about in the Leela śāstras, where Krishna and his friends would frolic, and it's like this big complex. I mean, when a banyan's been growing for a long time, because it's been growing for generations, no one knows where it started. No one knows where the origin really is, and it's like a forest in itself. I've spent considerable time living literally under that banyan tree. There's a little cottage with 2 apartments, like we call them ohana apartments, family, like mother-in-law suites, right under that are now right under that banyan tree because it has grown around them, and it's a really cool place. If you don't mind mildew. Anything else? Yes.
I thought it was super soul when you were talking about wearing blue in front of the deities, because during your lecture at one point, you said, kill the Navy, and you kind of pointed in my direction, and I recognized I was wearing navy blue. So I immediately put on my jacket so that I wasn't wearing blue in front of the deities. It was an excellent class. I had a question. I really like the points about confidence. Sometimes in devotional service, we find ourselves still trying to develop love for Krishna, but also trying to engage in our anarthas for the purpose of preaching. And, you know, surfing was an example you had. For me, it could be like social media or being in academia or something. But do you feel like confidence is that ingredient to avoid speculation? Because sometimes we're in the modes or fighting the modes and we're thinking, oh my God, am I doing this for Krishna, for Prabhupada, or am I indulging? And at that point, the instruction of being confident, saying, okay, this is for Krishna, I'm going to push through it, sometimes is like how we can thrive or please the...
Thank you. Yeah, it's an excellent question, and it's going to get me into a lot of trouble because the answers branch off in different ways. One is, the first thing is that vishrambha, that confidence, is confidence in the spiritual master. Confidence in the instructions of the spiritual master, in the character of the spiritual master. So we need to be careful where we take shelter, because we know this. We live in ISKCON, that sometimes things have happened that cause devotees to lose that confidence in their gurus. And that might, appear to threaten their connection with Krishna consciousness, although we have a lot of shiksha gurus to back us up when those things happen. The other thing is that these different things that we engage. There are three kinds of bhakti that Srila Jiva Goswami describes in his Bhakti Sandarbha. There's Aropa Siddha Bhakti, Sangha Siddha Bhakti, and Swarupa Siddha Bhakti. Swarupa Siddha Bhakti are like the 64 angas of sadhana bhakti. These are things that are inherently bhakti. Aropa Siddha Bhakti are things that are assigned as bhakti because they kind of help us with our bhakti, like taking a bath, brushing your teeth in the morning, that kind of thing. That's not bhakti inherently in itself. But because we come to the temple clean and fresh and awake after our cold shower, or ish, then we can kind of see them as bhakti. And then the Sangha Siddha Bhakti, they might be considered bhakti because of their association. So we use our proclivity for social media for preaching. We've got an Instagram account or a Facebook account, or I don't know about the TikTok account. I don't know. I guess people put their like a quick little thing that attracts you to your Instagram account that's supposed to attract you to your website or your blog or whatever. I don't know. But these things, they can become accepted as bhakti by their association with bhakti. So I was a teacher. I taught at San Diego State, at Mesa College, at Southwestern College, Miramar College, UCSD, so I tried to find ways to bring a little bit of bhakti into my classes, because basically I'm engaged in what Srila Prabhupada, at the very highest levels, some of the highest levels of what Srila Prabhupada often referred to as a slaughterhouse industry, getting people ready to exploit the material world and more effectively. So I would find, so that's kind of Sangha Siddha Bhakti. At the end of the semester, I would bring in Mahaprasadam. I would offer, like a whole bunch of prasadam, all directly to my deities, so everyone got Mahaprasadam, and share it with my students and with my colleagues at faculty meetings at the end of the semester. And there were other things that I would do. I would just a little sprinkle in a Hare Krishna there or something or other. One course that I taught, an upper division composition course, I found a way to kind of like bring in, and this was suggested by a textbook that I had seen, bring in like couple of different religious traditions. And so I'd have them read chapters 6 and 7 of the Bhagavad Gita, the Sermon on the Mount, and maybe something from Saint Teresa of Avila, maybe some Sufi poetry or something like that. So kind of like sprinkle that in. Or if I taught about writing about literature, I'd find some transcendental shlokas, often with one of Dravida's poeticized translations, and sprinkle that among the poetry that the students would have to read and write about. So that's Sangha Siddha. But Swarupa Siddha Bhakti, then that's inherently, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam. So, and all this, it becomes Bhakti, especially if we're doing it under the guidance of our gurus. So that's how it all becomes connected. This is the catalyst. I wrote an article about this many years ago, where in Chaitanya Charitamrita we read that the active principle in devotional service is the instructions of the spiritual master. That's the catalyst that makes something active. That's the touchstone. So Srila Prabhupada told us in his room in LA back in 1973, simply we require guidance from the expert spiritual master how to engage everything in Krishna's service. That's the only catch. Is that okay? There are other places we could go with it, but I think those are kind of the most essential things to address in your question. That's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful answer.
Anything else? Kaimi. Bhakta Kaimi
Chai,
Loa.
Mahamahalo for such an awesome class, Maharaj. I just wanted to comment on the offenses when worshiping the deities. And then, because what we had discussed in our Nectar of Devotion discussions is that it mainly talks about when you're kind of directly serving the deities, like if you're doing pujari service kind of thing. So you don't have to be super uptight about it's nice to look nice in front of the deities and be mindful of it. It also says my favorite offense in there, not to pass air in front of the deities, but I'm pretty sure 90% of people do it here in the temple room.
Dancing in kirtan after eating a whole lot of split pea dal or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But just wanted to make that comment. Jai.
Thank you. Anything else? All right. Thank you so much for your patience. Grantaraja Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai.